Commission. So, yeah, well, Mrs. Lynn, do you hear me? Good, okay. We're just waiting a couple minutes. We're going to wait about 1 minute until some more people join. Thank you, Mantagila, for following. Hello, Hope ZF from California. Hello to you. While we're waiting, I'm just waiting for a few more people to join. It's a sad day. We had the execution, as you know, of a second protester, and everyone who's following knows the case. And it's a tragedy. A young man was killed, and there was no reason for it. And it's the second protester killed, and of course the world has not reacted in any kind of powerful way. So this is a very sad day for everyone. I am not Iranian, one of the questions that were asked, I'm Canadian. But I have many Iranian friends and many new friends who are following. And of course, I know how sad Iranians are in Iran and abroad. And those of us who are supporting the Iranian people, we are sad too, because an innocent man was executed. He had no fair trial. He had no due process. He did not have the right to his own lawyer. He was taken, he was arrested, probably tortured from the pictures that we saw, and then executed. And that is against justice. It's against international law. It's against human rights. And the regime should be punished. And we're going to be talking about that today. So I just want to express my condolences to the family of the executed and to all of those who are mourning his loss today. I'm just looking at people joining. Galerivis is watching from Norway. Why don't you tell me where you're following from? Actually, I'm just looking at your things here on my own phone. So why don't you, before we begin some of the questions, why don't you tell me where you are, so I know where you are. Are you in Iran? Are you in Los Angeles? Are you in Europe? The Real Politico is in Canada. I'm from Montreal, so hello, Canada. Where else are you from? Let's take a look. California Bay Area, Haney HDDS. And from Sweden, P. Sofraki. We have Sepide from Toronto. We have Rebecca from Denver, Colorado. Bazdarn from Vancouver. Parvanian from London. Neda from Toronto. Corn on the Cob from Dallas, Texas. Kava from New York. Eat Plants, Grow Plants from Berlin. Violet, Iranian in Los Angeles. Dr. Essie from Washington. Calgary. So look, we have people from all across the world joining. And let's get to the main topic, and then I'll get to your questions. I'll say a few words. The topic that I'm focused on is something very specific. And I know many of you are concerned about the broader situation, and that's normal. But I'm at the United Nations, and my job is to do whatever we can at the United Nations to do the right thing. I'm not part of the United Nations. My organization, as you can see, is called UN Watch. We are an independent organization. We are a non-governmental organization. We are not part of the United Nations. We're an independent human rights group that watches the UN. We were created nearly 30 years ago by a great American named Morris Abram. He was a civil rights leader. He marched with Martin Luther King to fight for the equal rights of blacks in America so that they could vote, so that one man, one vote would be the law in the United States. He was eventually U.S. ambassador here in Geneva, Switzerland, and when he retired, he had the idea to create UN Watch, an independent organization that would watch the UN to see that it does the right thing, to protect the UN Charter, to try to uphold the principles of the United Nations Charter, which are good principles, and to defend human rights. And that brings us to today's topic, which is that a year and a half ago, in April 2021, the United Nations Economic and Social Council, that's a body of 54 countries, they voted to elect the Islamic regime in Iran to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is the UN Women's Rights Commission. I think it's a 45-nation body that deals with women's rights. And it's the highest women's rights body of the United Nations. And they elected the Islamic regime in Iran, the most misogynistic regime perhaps in the world. Maybe they compete with the Taliban, maybe some other countries, But this is a regime that is killing women who are demanding their human rights. They beat Mahsa Amini. They shot a woman with 167 pellets in her back because she was protesting. So the idea that this regime would be elected to the Women's Rights Commission was something that I found to be an abomination. And I was surprised because this happened a year and a half ago, in April 2021. No one said anything. There was silence. There was no word from France, from Germany, the UK, the US, Canada. All were silent. Okay? Everybody was silent. The human rights groups, the large human rights groups like Amnesty International, which does speak out on Iran, and Human Rights Watch, they do speak out on Iran. But in this instance, when the UN obscene election happened, a travesty of justice, the most Orwellian, George Orwell talked about in, War is Peace. Imagine the world where everything was twisted on its head. This was an Orwellian act, and everyone was silent. That's where UN Watch enters the picture. Our job is to see that the UN lives up to its principles. And when that election happened, we were not silent. We exposed the election of the Islamic regime. It was covered in Le Figaro and all across the world. And the world heard about it, and there were protests. My friend Masih Alinejad spoke out. She said, this is surreal. She said, a regime that doesn't allow women to sing a song, to dance in public, to ride a bike, that forces them to wear a compulsory hijab, and many other acts of discrimination against women, whether it's the limitations that they have, discrimination when it comes to laws of divorce or inheritance and so many other things, that they would be elected to the UN Commission to be a judge on women's rights was actually absolutely absurd. So we spoke out. And there was some outrage in the world, but it was a secret ballot. So we didn't know how countries voted. And actually, the only thing we did know was that out of 54 countries that vote on the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, 43 voted for Iran. I'm going to say that again. 43 out of 54 countries in April 2021 voted to elect the Iranian regime to the Women's Rights Commission. So only 11 did not vote for Iran. Now, we did some math because actually we figured out that there are 15 Western countries and EU countries sitting on this Economic and Social Council. 15, but only 11 didn't vote for Iran. That means at least 4, maybe more, at least 4 Western and EU countries voted for Iran. We asked, who did it? Was it France? Was it Australia? I don't think it was Australia. My country, Canada, announced Ambassador Bob Ray, who's been a strong advocate for women's rights, especially for women's rights in Iran. He said immediately Canada did not vote for Iran. That was good, but no other country was willing to say anything. And when the Associated Press, Matt Lee, asked the State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, America, do you condemn the election of Iran? The U.S. State Department, back in April 2021, refused to condemn the election. They spoke in general terms. The spokesman said, in general, there are countries with poor records that get elected. This is a bad thing. But he refused. He was asked again and again, and I posted it. If you go back to my posts, you'll see the video from April 2021, and the State Department spokesperson would not condemn, the United States spokesperson would not condemn the election of the Iranian regime. Why? You're all asking why. Why did this happen? Well, the United States has had a policy of appeasement under this administration, under the Obama administration, for the nuclear deal. This is not, I'm not saying something new. The premise of their foreign policy was that this Islamic regime of Iran is going to make a nuclear deal, which they did under Obama, and Trump pulled out, and now there are negotiations to sort of revive the deal. And so the American administration clearly did not want to anger the Iranian regime. They sort of criticized the election, but it was very indirect. They refused to condemn it directly, and if the United States wouldn't do it, then basically no other country would. So there was silence on this issue. We continued to speak out, and there were a number of members of parliament back in 2021 who complained about the election of the Iranian regime, but generally the world was silent. Now fast forward till September 2021, when the Mahsa Amini, when she was arrested illegitimately and beaten and killed, and then there were the protests and the crackdown, we launched a resolution. And actually, I'll be honest with you, I was approached by Nazanin Afshinjam, my friend, who's a terrific human rights activist for Iran, who's been active for so many years from Canada. And she approached me and she asked me my opinion on this. And I said, look, it's going to be so hard to remove the Islamic Republic of Iran because it's never happened before. This commission on the status of women, based in New York, existing for 7 decades, no country, to the best of my knowledge, has ever been removed. There is no procedure. Unlike at the Human Rights Council, you all know about the Human Rights Council. A few weeks ago, we had a special session on Iran for the first time, something that we called for. Actually, it was Nazanin Afshinjam and Ahmed Batabi, who represented 50 Iranian activists back in September 2009. We brought them, they spoke before the Human Rights Council. They called for an emergency session. That was ignored for 13 years. And finally, we held the special session and we created the fact-finding mission, and I'll say a few more words about that in a moment. But at the Human Rights Council, there is a provision in Resolution 60/251, Article 8. There is a provision to remove a country that commits gross and systematic human rights abuses. And in 2011, we spearheaded the campaign to expel Gaddafi, and he was expelled. And we did the same with Vladimir Putin in April, only the second time in the history of the Human Rights Council where a second country was removed. Gaddafi in 2011, Vladimir Putin in April. And I'm going to ask my colleague if she could pass me the water, please, because I'm going to be speaking a lot and I'm going to need some water. Thank you. So fast forward to the Commission on the Status of Women. It never happened before that a country was removed. There is no procedure. If you look in the procedures of the Economic and Social Council, which it creates these and votes for these functional commissions, there's several of them. There might be about 10, maybe more. Commission on the Status of Women and one dealing with crime and drugs and different things. There is no provision to remove a country. The Human Rights Council has a provision, Article 8. This is what you need to do. You need 2/3. The ECOSOC has no provision. So I told my friend Nazanin Afshinjam, there is no provision. So I think it's going to be very hard. It's not impossible, but it's going to be very hard to do it because countries at the UN, now we're getting to some nuts and bolts of how things really work. Here's how things work, my friends. Ambassadors at the UN, governments at the UN, they like things that are quiet. They do deals under the table, behind the scenes. They like, letting every country get elected, and they don't like to make a fuss. So if it's the Asian group, there are regional groups. There's the Western European group, Eastern European group, African group, Latin American group, and the Asian group. Iran belongs to the Asian group. So if the Asian group, if there's going to be a few countries, if they have 3 seats this year for the Asian group, and if they put in 3 candidates, and one of them is Iran, if one of them is Saudi Arabia, if one of them is China, we don't want to interfere because that'll make the ambassadors upset at us, and it's going to upset the apple cart, and maybe there's some deals that are done under the table. Everyone is happy to go along to get along. I'm going to say that again. If you want to understand the United Nations, people like to go along to get along. So they don't like to make a fuss and change things. So I told Nazanin Afshinjam, I said, if you want to remove the Islamic Republic of Iran from the Women's Rights Commission, known as the Commission on the Status of Women, the CSW, it's going to be so hard, okay? Because to begin with, countries don't like removing any members. I mean, even the Human Rights Council, which has a provision to remove a country, it only happened twice in 2 decades. Libya in 2011, Vladimir Putin in 2022. Of course, they never should have been there in the first place, and we're fighting for that all the time to oppose the election of these dictatorships. So I said it's going to be really hard to happen. I said almost impossible. But as I began thinking about it, I said, let's at least put it on the map. So we drafted a resolution, and legally, I'm a lawyer, and I looked at it and I said, look, the ECOSOC, they have the power to elect countries. It's by secret ballot. But if the same parent body has the power to elect a country to the Women's Rights Commission, they have the power to remove the country. That logically, that has to exist. And so I drafted a resolution. UN Watch put forward a resolution. It's a couple of pages. You can see it on our website, unwatch.org/Iran, unwatch.org/Iran. You can see, you can find the resolution that we drafted. And eventually, this group Vital Voices picked it up, and people like Nazanin Boniadi were outspoken. She came here to Geneva and spoke at the Geneva Summit for Human Rights, which we're a big part of. And she sat next to me at the United Nations, and she said, how can Iran, the regime in Iran, be elected to the Women's Rights Commission? It's absolutely absurd. She spoke out. And you have these terrific women's rights activists, Iranians in New York right now. They were in Geneva a few weeks ago. Gisu is one of them, and Nazanin, the actress, and several others. And they're doing amazing work, meeting with governments and lobbying. And you had this full-page ad, and then the Vice President of the United States got on board, and then the Canadian Foreign Minister, Chrysler Freeland, and, that's Melanie Joly, the Foreign Minister, the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister, Chrysler Freeland, and the New Zealand Prime Minister got on board, and many women's leaders, and Malala and others, and there was this full-page ad, and it got on the map. And the U.S. Vice President said, we're going to do it. And they requested a meeting. They put in their own resolution. It's very simple. It says that we call to remove Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, from the Commission on the Status of Women. And they requested a meeting. So now to the details. Now I'm going to give you the details of what's up ahead. And then I'm going to take your questions that you've submitted already. Okay, so the details are this Wednesday, December 14th, at 10 a.m. New York time. It's going to be, I believe, live webcast. You can go look for UN webcast, UN web live, you'll find it, UN webcast. You'll find the UN website that has live webcast, and you want to be looking for the Economic and Social Council, 10 a.m. this Wednesday, December 14th, New York time. Say that again, December 14th, 10 a.m. New York time. You can watch it live on the UN webcast website at the Economic and Social Council. You will see it. And I think what's going to happen is several countries may speak. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not a member of ECOSOC, so I don't think they necessarily have to speak. The president might give Iran the floor, is what they call a concerned country. That may be the case, probably would happen. And then whoever wants to speak will speak, and there'll be a vote. I asked, many of you who follow me saw my speech that I gave in the special session. The representative from the Islamic regime of Iran spoke. She told lies. She lost her papers. And I said that, if you're speaking the truth, you don't get confused. But she got confused and she lost her papers. And then I spoke and I called her out. Even though we're accredited to speak at ECOSOC, they told us that NGOs, non-governmental organizations, will not be able to speak. So unfortunately, we will not be able to speak. We'll hear from governments. I'm sure the United States will speak. I'm sure my country, Canada, will speak. I hope other countries will take the floor and call out the regime for its abuses. So that's what's going to happen. There's going to be a vote. There's 54 countries that vote. You just need a majority. So if the vote is, 20 to 19, and then all the rest abstain, it passes. You just need more yeses than nos, and the abstentions don't count. Now, I was asked, I'm going to go to some of the questions that I was asked, is what do I think the vote will be? Okay? What do I estimate the vote will turn out? And I've written this on Twitter that if you look at the countries who are going to vote, how they voted on a resolution concerning Iran a year ago at the General Assembly, the vote would be something like 28 to 11 with all the rest abstaining. Something like that. So the vote might be something like that. It might be, you could have more yeses because countries see what the Iranian regime is doing and they're embarrassed. And so you might have some more yeses. But I think you might have less yes votes because this never happened before. And a number of ambassadors are concerned. If you're from a dictatorship, then you're concerned that today they're going to remove Iran and maybe the next day they'll remove you. Look, it's very unlikely that's going to happen. Let's be honest. It's the first time in decades this has ever happened, and even the United States, at the Human Rights Council, there is a procedure, and only 2 countries have been removed in 2 decades. So, if I were another kind of dictatorship that's terrible on women's rights, to be honest, I wish they were removed, but I don't think they have to worry because this is really an extraordinary procedure, and the European countries don't like it. The Dutch foreign minister told his parliament in a letter, he said he had 3 arguments why they shouldn't do it. And he said the UN Commission on the Status of Women is where we reach out to other countries, the less like-minded. And he said, what good will it do? And he said, we have to be consistent. How could we remove Iran? But then maybe what about other countries? None of these arguments have any validity. The point that I'm making is it's so rare that you have the political will to remove one of these countries. The other dictatorships, to be honest, unfortunately, they don't really have to worry. So that's going to be the vote, in my opinion, will pass, but I don't know what the majority will be. And many of you have asked, why does it matter? Okay. I have many questions. Who cares? What does it matter? And I think for a lot of you following it, a lot of you who clicked on our petition, which you can find at unwatch.org/Iran, it does matter. When the United Nations elected the Islamic regime, it sent a message. Did it have any concrete meaning? Did it give the Islamic regime great power? Not really. The UN Commission on Women's Rights meets once a year. They adopt consensus resolutions. It didn't really change the balance of power in a significant way, but it sent a message. And the message was that the world has no problem with this disgusting regime that kills women, that beats them, that rapes them, that tortures them, that blinds them, that kills them, has no problem making them a judge on women's rights. That was the message that was sent a year and a half ago. And the message that will be sent on Wednesday, December 14th, is finally the beginning of some justice. The message that will be sent will be that this regime is isolated, this Islamic regime, this murderous regime, is an enemy of women, and the world will recognize that. So I believe that symbols matter. A lot of what happens at the UN are messages, words, signals. And if you're being killed right now in Iran, I know that you may say it doesn't matter. I need to be stopped. I need the people who are shooting at me to be arrested, to be stopped. And of course that's true. But to get there, the regime right now has some kind of aura, has the appearance of legitimacy for many countries in the world. And the Iranians who are following this, they know the truth. They know that this regime is completely illegitimate. But many countries in the world are dealing with it. They see it at the UN. So because of the special session that we had a few weeks ago, the world sees that Iran is being condemned. The world sees that Iran is being investigated. The world will see on Wednesday that the Iranian regime is the first in the world, the Islamic Republic, the first government in the world, the first regime in the world to be expelled from the Women's Rights Commission. That will be an important message. And as I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it again, it's the beginning. It's the beginning. Ultimately, the goal of the world has to be to end this regime. This is a regime that is murdering its people. We need to end this regime. And as I've said repeatedly, I said it at the United Nations, we need to sanction the killers. We need to expel their diplomats. We need to pull our diplomats from Tehran. We need to designate the IRGC as a terrorist entity. We need to stop the children of the regime going to my country, Canada, or Switzerland, or the UK, where they're received openly and are allowed to buy property and to take the money that they exploited from the Iranian people and use it to buy refuge in Western countries that their parents condemn every day. So there's hypocrisy there. And meanwhile, Iranian refugees, real refugees from the regime, have a hard time getting accepted and asylum in these same countries. So that has to end as well. So all of these things need to happen. I'm focused at the UN because that's my first responsibility where we are. And that's why we focused on the special session. And that was great. We got a great vote there. It was 25-6. The rest were abstentions. That was way better than we expected. That was a very high majority. And I want to see a big majority on Wednesday. So those of you who want to make a difference, you can do two things. One is you can sign our petition, which we're going to send to every country. So go to unwatch.org/Iran and sign our petition. And then if you go on my Twitter account or Instagram, you'll see that in my recent posts, and I'll do it again, we posted the Twitter handles of countries. Don't send something with 25 Twitter handles. That will be ignored. Send a personal message if you can. Pick one country, whether it's Peru, whether it's Benin, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Thailand, whether it's the Solomon Islands. Pick one country, and if you know someone there, reach out to them. If you know someone in the government there, try to make it personalized. So pick one country. If you know their language, as I've tried to do, you saw in my post yesterday, I wrote messages in French and in Korean and in Greek and in Italian. So try, if you speak the language, if you're from that country, speak out. If you can get a joint letter of several people, whatever you can to reach out to representatives of any country that's sitting on the Economic and Social Council. Look on my posts from yesterday. You'll see the list of all the countries. We're going to add to them. So you'll have the handles. I posted all the Twitter handles on my Twitter account. And you just need to see who are the members today of the UN Economic and Social Council. Reach out to as many as you can. I believe the EU countries, good news by the way, if you're just following, bravo à la France. Good news, France recently announced that they will vote for the resolution. We thought they would, but it hadn't been announced yet. We had the Parliament, the National Assembly announced, but not the government. The Foreign Minister announced recently in the Foreign Affairs Committee that she will vote in favor of the resolution. Bravo. And I commend the members of Parliament, the National Assembly in France, who pushed so much for this to happen. So I believe that the European Union countries will all vote yes. So I would focus on the non-EU countries. Some of the countries in Latin America, some of the countries in Africa. I mentioned Benin, there's other countries. Some of the countries in Asia, like Thailand. I think Tanzania is there. You'll see the list. Reach out to some countries that you're not sure how they're going to vote to, especially the non-EU countries. We already know that Canada, New Zealand, Guatemala, kudos to Guatemala, Canada, New Zealand, Guatemala, the US, the UK, they all announced, France announced, and I'm assuming the EU, if not already today, they're meeting in Brussels, they may be announcing right now that they are going to vote for the resolution. So I would focus on the non-EU countries, reach out to them, okay, and try to get them to vote the right way. Let me go to some of your questions. Nasli and many others asked, what are the consequences of expelling the Iranian regime from the commission? So the first thing that will happen is they'll be removed. It's going to happen basically right away. So the first consequence will be the Islamic regime of Iran will be removed from the Women's Rights Commission. Many of you never ever heard of this commission. Even me, that I focused on this, we've done some things at this commission for several years. We actually brought Iranians to speak. I think we brought Neuer who's a brilliant Iranian writer in New York. I think we brought her to speak, and others at this commission at a side event. But the main, if you ask me, the main consequence, the regime will be removed immediately after the resolution is adopted. And in my opinion, the main consequence will be Bisharaf. Bisharaf. The world will be saying, you have no honor, you have no dignity, you shame on you, to the regime in Iran. And that's what the people in Iran are saying to the regime in front of their faces. Bisharaf. You have no honor, you have no dignity. Shame on you. This is what the world will be saying to Iran, and I think it's very powerful. And the Iranian regime is fighting it. One of the reasons that they put out the fake story that was picked up by the New York Times and others, that they abolished the morality police, is to send a signal to the world, you don't have to worry anymore. There's no more discrimination in Iran. We took care of the problem. This is propaganda. And so many of you called out the media who didn't do fact-checking and repeated this fake narrative. So the message that will come out from the world is saying, shame on you, Iranian regime. And again, Iran is fighting it. They tried to say that they're changing the rules. In Iran, it was a lie. They put out stories. There was a story the other day in government propaganda media that Iranian women students are complaining about this because they think everything is wonderful in Iran and they want the UN to visit. Well, the UN would be happy to visit, actually, but the Iranian regime doesn't let the UN visit. They don't let the UN Special Rapporteur visit, so that was kind of ironic. They said, oh, the commissioners should visit. Guess what, Islamic regime? You've never let anyone visit. You never let the UN Rapporteur visit. You didn't let Ahmed Shahid, who was the Rapporteur, and the new one, Javad, you didn't let them visit. You didn't let the experts on torture, on violence against women, you don't let any of them visit. The only one you invited to visit Iran was the UN expert on sanctions, a mandate that you created. The Islamic regime with the non-aligned movement cynically in 2014 created what I call a fake mandate to condemn Western sanctions as human rights abuses. And the person who holds the job, her name is Alina Duhan from Belarus. She's state funded. I wrote about her. You can see my recent posts. It's on my highlight story about Alina Duhan. She's fake. She's an apologist for dictators. She visited Syria and said Syria is a victim. She visited Venezuela. She said Venezuela is a victim. Zimbabwe. This mandate and this person are propaganda, complete fakes. And so the Iranian regime invited her earlier this year to visit. And guess what? People were being killed in Iran. She didn't say anything. She put on the hijab, and in a press conference she said, the Iranian regime is a victim. and the West is to blame for everything. And then the regime took her words and made posters. And if you saw, I have a highlight, My Day at the UN, where I heard propaganda in the room, and then I went outside of the room, and I saw Alina Duhan, what she said in Tehran. They put on posters and brought it back to the UN. So they're just recycling their own propaganda. We revealed that she got $200,000 from China in the same year that she said that everything is great in Xinjiang. Okay, so I'll take a few more questions. What percentage of the vote do you expect to be in favor of expelling the regime? I already said. I think it'll be something like 28 to 11 and the rest abstentions, but it's really, I don't know. And again, I urge all of you to take action and sign our petition. Reach out to members of ECOSOC so we'll have the highest vote possible. Let's see, what else? Let's see. I have a lot of questions that are not dealing with the Commission on the Status of Women. I'll get to those in a moment. Someone asks, can Iran resist collaborating with the committee? What if they ignore the decision? Well, with this decision, they can't ignore it. If they're kicked off, they're kicked off, and that's what's going to happen. I'm very confident of it, but it doesn't matter about Iran. There's a big question about the Human Rights Council's fact-finding mission, and I'll come to that in a moment. That is a very different story, and I'll come to that in a second. A lot of you asked about that. Let me see some other questions. There's a lot of questions that are not dealing with the CSW. Let me talk about the fact-finding mission. Marjan asks, when will the fact-finding commission begin, and how can it prevent future human rights violations? So, let me say a word about the fact-finding mission, because a lot of you asked about that. So, two completely different things, right? Just so you know. The Human Rights Council is a 47-nation body in Geneva. It voted to create a fact-finding mission. The next steps are the following. They need to name the commissioners, 3 members of the mission. That will probably happen, I would think, within the next several weeks. Could happen this week. I don't know when. Hopefully it'll happen this month. I hope that it will. And then they need a staff. Okay, the commissioners, there will be 3 of them. They'll need a staff, and that the UN has to build that staff. That takes several months. So to be honest, I estimate that it may only get going in February or March, maybe sooner. We'll see. It's going to take time. It's not an immediate thing that's going to help. It's more of a long-term thing. Again, that sends a very important message. But if someone is expecting the fact-finding mission to arrive in Iran tomorrow and stop the killings, it's not going to happen. And I know that's sad news, but it's not going to happen. What the best thing that they can do is to collect evidence. The Iranian regime will not let this body visit. They will deny entry to them. They've already announced that. They're not going to cooperate. The fact-finding mission can go to neighboring countries, whether it's Turkey, Azerbaijan. They can go here in Geneva and invite people to submit testimony in various ways. And we're going to have to wait. They're going to invite people to submit testimony. So if you have evidence of crimes, whether it's photographs, videos, hold on to it. And when you see, I'll of course announce it. The moment that the fact-finding mission is ready, I'll announce it on this page. And you will know, and you'll have ways to submit, including in Farsi or in English or maybe in other languages, evidence of crimes committed by the regime, human rights violations, since September. Okay, since the protests from Masa Amini, that's pretty much the mandate of this mission. So you can wait till they begin the call for submissions, and then you can submit evidence. And what I recommended, I had an interview recently, and I recommended that I hope that various Iranian human rights groups based in America, based in Europe or elsewhere, will do the job of helping individuals submit testimony, collecting them, and then passing it on to the UN in a way that they'll be most effective. So I'm sure that there will be various NGOs. I'm sure my friend Gisu will be involved in things like that, and other Iranian lawyers. So that fact-finding mission, as I said, it probably won't get going for another couple of months. But when it does, you should submit evidence to it. and ultimately the significance is that they collect evidence, they will make findings, potentially naming individuals, and that then becomes a body of evidence that could be used in the future by courts. You know that the Swedish court is now holding an Iranian to account for crimes committed in 1988, things that the president of Iran was involved with, the death commission, killed thousands of people. So you're looking at sort of long-term justice, which is important. We hope it sends a signal to the perpetrators of crimes in Iran that you will be held accountable. That's the important thing. We don't know if the ICC can have jurisdiction. Does not seem to be something immediately in the cards, but maybe one day in the future. But certainly national courts that have what's called universal jurisdiction could potentially hold Iranian perpetrators to account. So that's what the fact-finding mission can do, is it can collect evidence, make findings, and hopefully within a year we'll get some results. So it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing. And I know many of you are asking me, what can we do now? People are being killed now. People are being tortured, raped, blinded, beaten now. What can we do? And I'll be honest with you, I can only tell you what we're doing, and I don't have all the answers. We're doing our part at the United Nations so that the UN will do as much as it can do to send the right signals. The UN is not going to send troops. The UN Security Council has the power to send troops and peacekeepers, but Russia has the veto. China has the veto. And even if they didn't have the veto, the United States is not sending troops anymore to the Middle East to fight wars. And maybe they should. Maybe they should send the US Marines to save the people of Iran. Responsibility to protect. But no one's going to do it. You know, the US and Europe are not going to do it. I think that they have to do the minimum things they can do. Masih Alinejad has said, we're not asking you to save us from the regime. We're asking you to stop saving the regime. So the problem is that when you have the US administration, Secretary Blinken just a few days ago, and the British government and others saying, we want to negotiate with the regime for the nuclear deal. What does that mean? You're saying you need an interlocutor, that's the regime, so you want the regime to stay in power. If you want to negotiate a nuclear deal, and how could you negotiate with people who are murdering their own people? How can you trust them? I think it's completely absurd. It's a terrorist regime. You know, as the people of Iran said, Soleimani was a terrorist, and Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, is a terrorist. The people of Iran said it bravely, repeatedly. Not just now, they said it a year ago after Soleimani was killed. They said it in the streets. So the Western countries need to understand, and we're speaking out, that it's a terrorist regime. You can't keep saying we're going to negotiate, because when you say we're going to negotiate, you give them power, you give them legitimacy, and you say that you want them to remain. Because if you didn't want them to remain, you wouldn't be wanting a deal from them. So there's a very strange dynamic going on. So what we're calling for, and I think all the activists are calling for, is to expel the diplomats from Geneva, from Paris, from London, from Berlin, from all across the world. Pull our diplomats back. If they're executing protesters, we just had the second terrible execution, illegal, immoral execution, we have to send a message. The Ayatollah is looking at us. So we need to expel the diplomats. We need to designate the IRGC as a terrorist entity. As I said, take action against the children of the criminals who are in our Western countries, exploiting the money and then reaping the fruits. And whatever actions we can take to help the Iranian people to end this regime. The regime has to be ended. So I want to make a point once again. The expelling the Islamic regime from the Women's Rights Commission is the minimum that has to be done on Wednesday. It's the beginning of so much more that we need to do. I'm going to just take a second just to look at some of your questions, if I can see some of the things that are being said. Give me just a second here, if it works. It's going slow, but okay. So what will the impact of sending the diplomats back be? Again, if you have the diplomats, first of all, many of the diplomats that are here are spies and are assassins and are there to help murder people, blow people up. So certainly sending the diplomats away from here, I think, would be sends a powerful message. It isolates the regime and it stops them from being able to do their manipulations and their terrorism around the world. So I think that's very important. There was one question that was asked One question that was asked was, if Iran is removed from the Women's Rights Commission, will that make them any less engaged? Maybe you can't hold them to account anymore. That could be true in some UN bodies, but the Women's Rights Commission was not doing that at all. They were never holding Iran to account. The only country they ever condemned was Israel. So the Iranian regime and its allies would hijack this commission to go after their enemy, Israel. But Iran was never held to account, so that will not change anything. They were not being criticized, they were not being examined, so you don't have to worry about that. Someone asked, will now that Iran is being removed, will Iran take action against women, more crimes against women in Iran? I don't know what they're going to do, but I don't think that will happen. I think the international community has to be strong, and weakness is what invites aggression, and taking a strong stand and pushing back is how you confront dictators. Winston Churchill taught that to the world. When Hitler rose up in Germany, he said, if we're being passive and appeasing, you're just feeding the appetite of the beast, and you need to push back. And that's the only message that dictators understand. And that's certainly what Garry Kasparov, and that's his message to Putin. I think it's the message to all the dictatorships. They keep pushing, and they see if the world pushes back, the Western democracies, which are very strong. And until now, they have not been pushing back in a significant way, and they need to push back. You've had many other questions that were asked, and I couldn't answer all of them in this session, but I will try to answer some of them over the next few days on my account. So thank you all for leaving comments below and asking questions on on the story. Thank you all for your support. I've had tens of thousands of activists on this issue, mostly Iranians in Iran and around the world, who've been sending their encouragement and support. Thank you. I had a question that was asked, how do I keep doing this? We're fighting this fight not just for Iranians. We're fighting for human rights in China, bringing victims from Venezuela and Cuba and Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Belarus, Russia. My friend Vladimir Kara-Murza is in prison in Russia, and we brought his wife to speak at the UN and gave her our highest human rights award for her husband. So this is the work that we're doing to fight dictatorships around the world, to empower the human rights heroes who are resisting them. That's what we're trying to do. That's what gives me the strength, is the support from so many around the world, and seeing the political prisoners, their families, and the courage that they have. That's what gives us the strength, and we're going to keep doing it as long as we can. And we know that on so many of these issues, we're the only ones. Once again, when the Islamic regime was elected to the Women's Rights Commission, UN Watch was the only organization in the world that spoke out. I put in my post the other day that I'm disappointed with Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. And let me be clear, these are two huge human rights groups. We're a very small group. We're about 10 people. We have a small budget. Amnesty has hundreds of people. They have millions of followers. They have millions of members. They have budgets of tens of millions of dollars. And I'm going to wrap up in just a minute. They should be speaking out. Now, I'm not saying they're not speaking out on Iran. I know that Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have spoken out on Iran. I know that they have. But they did not speak out about the election to the UN Women's Rights Commission. Part of the problem is that the head of Amnesty, Agnes Callamard, used to work for the UN. And many of the people at Human Rights Watch, they have a revolving door. One day they're working at the UN Human Rights Office, and the next day they're working for Amnesty, and they go back and forth. So they're very much part of the UN system, and if you want to be part of the UN system, you're not allowed to criticize the dictators who are members. That's considered, poor form. So that's one of the reasons that they very often don't criticize the UN. And so it's groups like ours that are truly independent. Our support is only from donations. We don't get money from any government. It's only from individuals making donations. And so we're the only ones, in many cases, who are speaking out against UN injustice. So knowing that we're the only ones gives us a certain adrenaline, I would say, because if not for us, there's no one else who's going to expose this. So I'm glad that this week that we have celebrities around the world who have spoken out and who are supporting this, and that there are activists who are supporting this. A year and a half ago, it was just us. We were the first to submit the resolution. I'm glad the US took it up. I'm glad France is on board. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying thank you for your support. Thank you for following. Please continue to share our stuff. We're going to do whatever we can to help. I know it's not enough. I know if you're in Iran and people are being beaten and tortured and killed, whatever we're doing is not enough. I know that. But we're trying to do as much as we can. I assure you of that. And I feel your pain because I know that someone was executed today.